Thank you, Henry. Just information, the Sheen Housing Authority has left grant information in the hallway, so on your way out, you're able to pick that up if you'd like, any information. Next on the agenda, I'm happy to please announce that we have Dr. Frank Sciremammano. He is a full-time professor of mechanical engineering at the Rochester Institute of Technology and a licensed professional engineer. He was appointed in 1995 by the International Joint Commission to serve as a member of the St. Lawrence River Board of Control and is currently the ranking member of the United States section. He has also served as a member of the study board of the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Study, LOSL, from 1999 to 2006 and is the co-author of the Minority Report. He resides in the town of Brighton and has served as the chairman of the town planning board, chairman of the Monroe County Environmental Management Council, and chairman of the town of Brighton Conservation Board. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Frank Sciremammano.
Thank you very much. We've been here an hour. If you want to get up and stretch and move a little to wake up, I'm a professor. I may bore you to death, so be forewarned. I'm going to take this over here so I can work the projector. People can still hear me?
Sure.
Can you hear me without it?
Pretty good, but
In the back, can you hear me in the back?
better with it.
Menza, so I will use it. So let me get this started. I have a PowerPoint for you. If I can get this to work. Okay, it's warming up. While it warms up, let me tell you, I've been involved in this since 1973. From the 73 flooding, I was a grad student. We worked together, you remember. I actually did my thesis on better water control. It's kind of an engineering problem for me, until I found out that not everyone agrees on what better means. And then I've been interested in it ever since. In 1995, Louise Slaughter used her influence to get me appointed to the St. Lawrence River Board of Control. I don't know why that's doing that. Maybe the technical folks can help. So I've been on the Board of Control since 1995, then was on the study board. I will give you my perspective, which aligns very much with Henry Stewart's perspective on the history of that. I'll give you a little more detail on it. But I try to stick to the facts, and I may say some things tonight that you don't agree with. Feel free to throw vegetables or boo. Okay. So let me,
I'm also a professor, I'm sorry.
there you go. Yeah. So what I'm going to talk about is what happened this year. 2017 flood, Plan 2014, how it influenced this year, and then the history of 2014, and then what I think can be done going forward to fix this. So, again, this is what you don't want to hear. But 2017, the flood was not caused by Plan 2014. Not caused by it. But, there's a big but. It did not protect against the extreme levels as promised by the IJC. If you look at their report, it's hard to read. The report on Plan 2014 starts with protecting against extreme water levels. Well, obviously it didn't work. And we knew it wouldn't work. And we said it wouldn't work. But that I'll talk about. And it's still, even though it didn't cause this year's flooding, that doesn't make it a good plan of operation. So let's take a closer look. First thing is you really need to understand some key geographic locations in this system. You also need to understand that Plan 2014 does not allow the now called Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board, used to be the Board of Control, what I sit on, does not allow us to take any discretionary actions until it's too late, until we hit trigger levels. It's like not allowing the truck to put on the brakes until it's already at the stop sign. And that, it's subtle, but Plan 2014 really caused a shift in, a fundamental shift in priority from controlling lake level to protecting downstream. And that makes a big difference. So here's the Great Lakes watershed. This is the land that drains into, here's Lake Ontario. All of this land, all these lakes drain down into Lake Ontario and then down the St. Lawrence River. But this is how I like to look at the system. Water flows downhill. Lake Superior up at the top, there is a dam there. Then it goes through Michigan and Huron down the Detroit River to Lake Erie, over Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario. Notice that Lake Ontario's up and down does not have any effect on the upper lakes. And that the water coming down is uncontrolled. It just arrives. Down to St. Lawrence, Lake St. Lawrence sits behind the Moses Saunders Dam that Henry Stewart mentioned. That's where the control takes place. There's another smaller dam downstream, and then Montreal, and Lac St. Louis, Lake St. Louis is right there at Montreal. We'll see that's an important location. So here it is on a satellite view, Lake Ontario, and again we cut off our south shore, unfortunately. The river, you can see it's quite a distance to the dam and the lake that was created behind it, and then more distance before you get to Montreal. And one of the important factors this year is the Ottawa River, which comes in there. It arrives and merges with the St. Lawrence River right at Montreal. And if we look at drainage basin, this is Lake Ontario's watershed where the water arrives. This is the direct drainage into the St. Lawrence. This is the Ottawa River basin. It is very large, and it is essentially uncontrolled. There are a bunch of reservoirs, but they don't use it for control. They use it for hydropower and just to minimize the flows. So let's talk about what happened this year and what the board did. January through March, and I'll have some graphs to show you. Basically, the system experienced wet and mild weather, and winter operations were quite difficult. One of the things to understand is that the St. Lawrence River freezes. At least it's supposed to freeze. And as that starts to freeze, the water flow has to drop, so you get a nice stable ice cover. As that thickens through the winter, normally, then the flow is increased. Well, this year, there were 5 instances where it started to freeze and then thawed. Started to freeze and then thawed. Twice in March it did that. And I'll show you the effect of that on the outflows. April through May, exceptionally wet weather with record water supplies and record, most important, Ottawa River flows. And June through present, we actually had continued wet weather until September, and we were working under criterion H14, which allowed the board to actually make some deviations, and we'll see what the result of that. Can we lower that a little? Is that possible? Or is that? Oh, okay, yeah. Got something else to say over there? There we go. Because I want to get that last line in, because we will see, though, even when we were taking discretionary action, it was limited in consideration of St. Lawrence Seaway shipping. Thank you. Okay, so here's Lake Ontario water levels. I'm going to use plots like this a lot. Here's the months along the bottom. In the gray, dark gray, was what happened in 2015. In the red is what happened in 2016. The blue is the long-term average. These gray bars at the top are the monthly maxes, monthly mins, and these are the trigger levels in Plan 2014, which I'll talk about later. So, where did we start? We started at the end of 2016 right at average. In fact, we were 245.7 January 1. That's right on average. So, I heard the politician saying, why didn't you do something last fall? I didn't see any indication last fall that we were going to have a problem. Maybe you do, but I don't see it. Then we started going up. We ended up 4 feet 7 inches over where we started. You all know that. So let's see why and what happened. Oh, now we're coming down. You also know that. So, let's start with the winter. We rose 60 centimeters. About 10 centimeters of that we attribute to ice formation, because the flow had to go up and down for these freeze-thaw cycles. The rest of it was more or less natural, and in fact, it followed almost exactly the 2016 trajectory. So that by the end of March, we were exactly where we were a year ago, 2016. Sitting in my seat, I saw a problem because we were a foot above average or so, but I didn't see a crisis. We were there last year, and last year we ended up with a fairly good year. What we got plotted on here is called a spaghetti plot, where it's, again, months on the bottom, and this is now how much water arrives in Lake Ontario. That includes all the flows from the rivers, Lake Erie, evaporation off the lake, rainfall right on the lake. Every year for 100 years, actually 117 years. We highlighted a couple of years on here. In red is 1973. In green, 1993. And in blue, 2017. If you look at the winter, you can see we were relatively wet. We were at the upper end of the spaghetti diagram, in league with what happened kind of in 1973, although 73 really jumped in March. Wet weather, and I also had temperature plots I'm not going to show you. It was also mild. Between January and March, we had the 12th highest inflow on record. That consisted of the 13th highest inflow from Lake Erie, 21st highest from the local basin. The result was the 12th highest amount of water that arrived during that winter month. But even with that, we weren't in real bad shape because we were right there where we were the year before. So if you look at January, February until the end of March, you can see ups and downs. That's due to ice formation. But we really weren't that far off the average. We were above average. These are outflows. How much water is released? It was still above average, and we had these dips. And again, the net result with the ice formation was roughly 10 centimeters. So there's the winter ice operations. And again, there were variable ice conditions, presented some operational challenges for the people up at the dam, and restricted the outflows, but still above average overall. And again, ice formation is natural, and it has to be managed. The biggest flooding in Montreal was due to ice jams. We've seen that around here on the smaller creeks in February and March. You get an ice cover, it starts to melt, the pieces break up, they go downstream and jam. The water backs up behind it, uncontrollable, and then it breaks loose. And that's the biggest floods that they ever saw in Montreal. So managing the ice on the lake is an imperative. Let's look at the next section. This is where Armageddon hit. This is where the rains came. We jumped 80 centimeters over this roughly 2-month period. 31 inches. And it truly was biblical. We had 40 days of rain. It's hard to see these maps. Lake Ontario sits here. This is the total amount of rainfall in millimeters. This scale, where it's purple, is between 150 and 300 millimeters of rain. This shows the difference from average. And you can see on Lake Ontario, it's a little brown. But up here on the Ottawa, remember the Ottawa River comes right down here. Ottawa River Basin had in the brown, which is roughly 150%, or almost two times, between 150 and 200% of their normal rainfall. And again, that's April to mid-May. That resulted in supplies into the lake, in addition to Ottawa River, that were at record highs. So now in 2017, you can see we're just below the 1993 monthly, but if you integrate over this whole period, you see that we had a record total inflow April and May. Highest ever recorded. Into the lake directly. That doesn't even account for what was going on the Ottawa. Here we see the supplies into the lake. We have average, again, months. This red is 2016, and the black is 2017. We had a big storm April 4 to 9. This is the rainfall pattern. Here's Lake Ontario. You can see it was on both sides. Much worse downstream, but we had a lot of rain. And you can see what happened to the supplies into the lake. April 29th to May 1st, and then May 4th to May 8th. Again, a large event, now more in the basin, but certainly in the Ottawa. And now May 4 to 8, red all around. Record rainfalls for that period. And that gave us record supplies. In addition to what was going on in the lake itself, the Ottawa River was flooded. This is, again, months. Spaghetti diagram of the Ottawa River flows. And you can see, again, 73 in red, 93 in green, 2007 in blue. New all-time record flood on the Ottawa River. So we have high lake supplies, Ottawa River coming in at Montreal, combining to flood Montreal. This was the effect. We had high levels on Lake Ontario. You guys know this. Very high levels in the upper St. Lawrence, Thousand Islands down through. See this house, this business, this Coast Guard station all flooded. And we saw the same thing. What people didn't realize is the flooding downstream. This is along the St. Lawrence. These are houses with first floor flooding. We didn't have a lot of first floor flooding. We had water in basements, we had water in yards, we had water in garages, but we didn't have inundation to 2 feet in the house. That's what was going on downstream. This is a dock in Montreal. This is an apartment building. Their garage was completely flooded out. And you saw in the news where they were evacuating people. Something like 500 homes had to be evacuated. During that April into May period, the board still could not do anything beyond what the plan called for, because we were not allowed to deviate until we hit the trigger. We didn't hit the trigger until April 28th or so. Up until that time, it's governed by the plan and something called the F limit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the F limit. What it basically tells the board is you need to limit the level at Lake St. Louis downstream to a certain level based on the level on Lake Ontario. As the level on Lake Ontario goes up in steps, you can raise the level downstream. Remember, the more water we release, the more they go up. So it steps up. There are steps in Lake Ontario water level and steps here in Lake St. Louis. The problem, notice here at the highest level, we have to hold that no matter what the lake does. Again, that's the subtle shift that occurred with Plan 2014, change in priority to controlling what's happening downstream rather than on the lake. Under 58D, the board was mandated to keep the lake below 247.3. That was our first priority. Now you see the first priority is control that downstream level. The lake went up 28 centimeters, almost a foot, while we held Montreal to 22.48. Now, they were flooding. They couldn't use any more water, but it would have been good if the board had some discretion to more carefully balance the impacts between the two. That's part of the problem in 2014. By the way, here's the outflows then during that period. And you can see the dips, the reductions in flow that we had to make in order to keep the downstream level within the limits, within the steps, within the tiers. This caused some, and I emphasize some, maybe a 6-inch difference on the lake. We may have been able to make if we could have deviated that. Once we hit the end of April, we were able to start deviating. At that point, the flooding downstream was so bad that the board could not agree on giving them more water. Not when there's first floor flooding, roads being washed out. We didn't have that situation yet. So, highest levels of flooding, Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, were in Plan 2014 with the F limit. These are the levels downstream, and you can see how precipitously they rose. That's the upper limit that we had to hold for them. Since then, the board was able to operate under H14, which allowed some discretion. Once the flooding subsided, proposal was, okay, now we can really up the flow. Let's maximize it. If you look at this scale, this is the levels, and we look at the outflows. By the way, the supplies continued high. These are the supplies into the lake again. Notice that we're at or near record levels all through the summer. That goes out to September. So it's remained wet. However, we were able to do a record outflows during that period, which kind of limited any further rise in the lake. Here's the supplies. Again, these were the two big peaks in the early spring, but now we're in June. We had another big storm, June 22, another record into the lake. They stayed high. These are the averages, the blue. 2016 is red. 2017 supplies continued very high. A couple of more storms. Here's the water levels. So again, we surpassed the criterion H14, April 28th. Now the board can take some action. It's flooding downstream. We really can't give them any more water. Through the rest of the summer, we were able to take some discretionary action, and the lake started dropping. The weather also improved. September 1, we came out of H14, and now again we're on autopilot with Plan 2014. It is determining the flows. So in this period, these are the outflows. Remember, that's what the board controls, how much water to release. Notice we kept it steady at about 10,400 CMS. We jumped it up to that when the flooding became a little less downstream. What could we have done more? The only thing we could have done more, we think the channel capacity has never been tested, is about 11,500 CMS. But in order to do that, we have to stop shipping on the St. Lawrence Seaway. The board would not agree to do that. We were subjected to a massive lobbying campaign by the Canadian shipping companies. And the board only acts if it's unanimous. We can work on what's called a consensus basis. We all have to leave the room and say, okay, I can live with that. Look at our board membership on the website, and you can determine why we were not stopping shipping, even for a week or two, which is what some of us were advocating for. So, did Plan 2014 contribute? Again, the board was not even permitted to react until we were above 247.7 on April 28th. At that point, it was too late. You're hitting the brakes after the accident. And before that, this F limit, which is fundamentally unfair, was governing. There's the F limit again. And again, Lake Ontario rose 28 centimeters, 11 inches, while the outflows were either reduced or maintained to keep the downstream level. So let's talk about 2014. I gave you a little hint as to why I think it's not working right, at least for people in this area. And this will dovetail on what Henry had to say, because we experienced the same thing. I was on the study board. He was part of the PIAG. In the end, we would not sign the report, Dan Barletta and I. It was the first report the IJC ever issued where they just took out the signature page. And instead, we issued a minority report. It's not one of the recommended plans. The IJC put out a document. This is the result of 15 years of scientific work, careful consideration, public input. No, that was not true. Not true at all. The damages for Plan 2014 are they're limited to the South Shore. The economic analyses we took a lot of exception to. They underestimated the damages, especially to the lakeshore. The IJC said, oh, we put in trigger levels, and you go above that, you can deviate. You saw they don't work. And we told them that wouldn't work, those with experience. I think the most important thing is that for 50 years, the IJC told people, plan on a 4-foot range. Set your break wall. Put your gas stop. do your launches, rely on that, and then boom, with the stroke of a pen, that's all gone. To me, that's a fundamental commitment the government had violated. With your patience, do you mind if I go on? I'm going to elaborate on some of these. Is that okay? I know it's late, and I know it's hot. So, again, this is not one of the recommended plans. This is far more radical in its damages to Lake Ontario. I'll show you the numbers. It shifts the damages to Lake Ontario in order to provide no less protection for Quebec. We'll see why that happened. The study recommended 3 plans. One was called the economic plan. It basically optimized operation to generate economic activity. So it really favored hydropower, shipping, so forth. There was an environmental plan, which optimized for environmental benefits. They called that Plan B or B+. And then there was what was labeled the balanced plan. It did both. It had environmental benefits, didn't cause too much damage, and the damages were distributed equally. It was balanced. The IJC actually recommended a version of the balanced plan, and the environmental groups came out and said, no, we want Plan B, we want the environmental plan. The New York State DEC said, we insist on that or nothing. So the IJC withdrew the plan, the balanced plan, and they formed this secret, closed-door working group with representatives only from government agencies, Quebec, Ontario, New York, Canada, federal government, U.S. federal government. Guess who represented you? New York State, DEC. They were at the table, they were calling the shots, they were negotiating on your behalf. They wanted Plan B+. This is a little complicated. I'm going to try and explain it. I apologize. I'm kind of a geeky numbers guy. So this is environmental benefits projected during the study for the various plans. The yellow ones are the ones that came out of the study board, the 3, the economic plan, the balanced plan, and the environmental plan. And you can see the difference in the environmental benefits. They're higher for B, they're okay for D, and there aren't any for A, environmental benefits. After the secret negotiations, they had 2 versions. One was called Plan BB7 and then 2014. Those are in red. Notice the environmental benefits are the same, basically. But look at the damages to Lake Ontario. Again, DD is 0 because everything was measured relative to it. Plan D actually had a little bit of benefit. A had a little bit of damage, B plus a lot more. Whoa! BB7 in 2014 that came out of the secret negotiations, the damages on Lake Ontario were increased significantly. What happened? I said, what happened? Fortunately, since I was one of 2 members of the study, of the control board that was put on the study, my Canadian counterpart was giving me some inside information because he was also on that negotiation. And Quebec insisted that they have no less protection for their citizens than they had under the previous. So, if you add in Quebec's damages, you can see the environmental plan had damages for them. Neither of these 2 plans, and the one that was adopted, has any damages for Quebec. Quebec's government stood up for their citizens. They said, we will not accept any plan that gives more damages. New York State said, okay, we'll take it. We'll deal with those people. That's the quote I got from my friend on the committee. They said, actually apologized to me, the people from Quebec. He said, you know, Frank, we tried to do everything we could, but you're really dealing with some characters there. And they don't care. They want that environmental plan. And just a different plot. Again, out of the study, even the environmental plan, the damages were distributed almost equally between the lower river of Quebec and Lake Ontario. Whereas what came out of the secret negotiations, BD7, all the damages to Lake Ontario benefit to Quebec. Same thing with 2014, just slightly different damages. You got screwed. Guess who was at the heart of that? Guess who was in charge of that? The DC and the governor's office. The administration in New York State turned a blind eye. I went to Albany, told them all that. Met with the governor's staff, met with the people. met with the Department of State, with the DEC people, Dan Barletta, Henry Stewart, Jack Steinkamp. We spent 3 years banging our head against the wall, telling people this is what's going to happen. This is not good. Don't have them approve it. We had most of the assemblymen from this area saying, no, don't do it. We had most of the state senators say, don't do it. Yet the governor's office, because they couldn't have vetoed this, just said, go ahead. So now we have 2014. And by the way, I like to say, the governor has raised political hypocrisy to new heights this year. When he came out and said to us on the control board, you know, you really should have let out a lot more water in the spring, when his plan that he approved does not allow, it ties our hands, does not allow us to do that. So anyway, again, it explicitly violates a bunch of guidelines that were adopted in the study. It said that there should be no disproportionate loss. 2014, all of the losses are basically concentrated in the South Shore of Lake Ontario. They said that no plan should be adopted. This is what the study board said. Don't adopt a plan unless compensation and mitigation is not only proposed, but in place. No compensation, no mitigation. And finally, the study board said any plan that's developed should be transparent with broad stakeholder input and support. This was done by a secret committee behind closed doors. We didn't even know the members, let alone when they were meeting, what was the agenda. And they argued they were exempt from freedom of information because the IJC is a treaty organization, international. It's exempt from freedom of information. We couldn't find out anything. It's completely outdated in terms of the economics. I'm not going to go through all this, but basically we pointed out right at the beginning that this is flawed, the damages were underestimated, and that even the National Research Council said, don't rely on this. It's innovative, it's nice what you did, but don't make multi-million-dollar decisions on that basis. Completely ignored. This is the trigger levels, and again, we're not allowed to do any routine deviations to Lake Ontario. But we can do all the deviations we want for the river. Next month, in October, we're going to cut the flow back for 3 days so that people can haul their boats out. If there's a ship coming into Montreal and they need more water, we can release more or cut it back if we have to. That's all allowed under Plan 2014. But if the level's going up on the lake or down and we want to do something about it, we're not allowed. Again, fundamental shift in priorities. And again, as I said, waiting for the trigger levels to hit is too late. This is the old 4-foot range in the black line that we were mandated to keep the lake. This is now the new, what the IJC said would be the minimum and maximum, and these are the trigger levels. Notice first the discrepancy between low water. You have a little room, you hit the trigger, you have a little room before you drop down and hit the bottom. On the top, you have no room. By the time you hit the trigger level, you can't take any action to avoid it. So, the result, our peak was here this year. Well above what they said would be the maximum, and it's because you couldn't take any action until it was too late, until downstream was in such a bad situation you couldn't really do anything else. So, and by the way, I'm speaking for myself as an individual, not as a board member. They're probably ready to throw me off anyway, but that's fine. These are my thoughts on what can and can't be done. I think the horse is out of the barn on Plan 2014. As Henry said, there was a significant amount of money put in by Washington offices, New York offices, the environmental groups, Save the River, to get this thing done. They lobbied hard, they misled. It's in place. To get any changes, it has to go back to the governments. They all have to approve, and Quebec is not going to make a change for that. They have the upper hand. So I don't think you're going to rescind it. But built into it is something called adaptive management. What that means is the IJC said, well, as time goes on, as you learn, you can make changes to the plan. That's your best hope. And what I suggest, and I actually brought to the board, modify that F limit. Make it so it's more equitable upstream and downstream. If the lake keeps going up, then they need to keep going up. That's what's fair, that's what's balanced. Trigger levels, either lower them or allow the board, we do forecasting all the time. If we have a forecast going south 6 months, that we may hit a trigger level, take action then. Don't wait till you hit it. So I've made those 2 suggestions. We're going to see where it goes. The other thing, and this I'm going to leave for you guys to go and look on our website at the board membership, make sure the board members that are doing this don't have any professional or personal conflicts of interest. I'll say no more. You guys go do some research.
Come on, help.
In order for this to happen, you need people on the IJC that are willing to stand up to the environmental lobby, that are willing to do what's right. Now, the IJC are a presidential appointment. They come around when the president changes. So, we're anticipating we're going to get new commissioners. We need to get people in there that have a level head that aren't owing to the environmental groups. The last appointment from New York to the IJC was a woman from Syracuse that ran an environmental organization whose sole purpose was to get Plan BV7, the environmental plan, in place. And that's what she did, with the help of other commissioners. We think, again, I'm reading between the lines, I think we may have some leeway with some of the Canadian commissioners. They're starting to understand the gravity of this. You know, Henry said there's nothing happens in Canada but Montreal, the islands, were closed for 2 months. They're starting to realize this could affect them. Also, if we had stopped shipping, that would have really affected them. And the commissioners are starting to understand, well, this could be really serious on our side also. So if we can get good commissioners on the U.S. side, I think we can get something done. But that's the only way anything's going to happen. And the way to do that is keep talking to Louise Slaughter, Catco, Collins. Tell them that Trump has to point people to this thing that are not business associates, that aren't, I don't know what, campaign managers from Michigan, but people that are willing to stand up to the environmental lobby and do what's right for the people in New York. And Governor Cuomo needs to also push. If anybody can sue, I think the state of New York can press the federal government at this point to say, this is unacceptable, you need to change this thing. So anyway, oh, by the way, just the current conditions, again, we're 13 centimeters still above average. The outflows right now are following what we call the L limit, which limits the flow for safe navigation on the seaway. As the lake goes down, basically the cross-section of the river is reduced, and so in order to pass the same amount of water, the velocities go much higher. Sorry for the geeky stuff, but the ships cannot maneuver if the velocities are too high. So right now, the flows you're going to see, they start decreasing as the lake level goes down in order for safe navigation. This is our best forecast right now. It's a probabilistic forecast. Very wet conditions exceeded 5% of the time, 50% of the time average, 5% of the time dry. You can see that if we have average conditions, at the end of the year, we'll finally hit long-term average. Right where we started this year, by the way. Next year, somebody asked me, what's going to happen next year?
Predictions, yep.
Tell me what the weather's going to be. I'll tell you what's going to happen. We haven't figured out yet how to forecast, even climatologically, what's going to happen in 6 months. So that's what's going to determine what happens next year. The key is to have the board be able to take action sooner rather than later. So anyway, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I appreciate your patience. It's hot, it's late, but I'd be happy to take questions.